Hi everyone, it's John. It is August 27th, and it's a Tuesday, so I've got another book review for you today. Today, I think, will be the first ever Albanian writer that I've ever showcased on this channel, because I think he's really the only Albanian writer, at least the only living Albanian writer, that's really regularly translated into English. And his name is Ismail Kadare, or Kadare. I don't know how you pronounce it. If you know Albanian, please help me out. But this is his novel, The General of the Dead Army, a novel. It's always really interesting, I think, to sort of look back on a writer's writerly life, something that the recent passing of Toni Morrison has allowed us to do as an American literary community. And despite the fact that Ismail Kadare is still alive, at least as of August 2019, he's well into his 80s. So we can safely assume his best writing is probably already behind him. Although people were saying of Toni Morrison that she was publishing her greatest novels in her 70s and 80s, so that may not be the case. The General of the Dead Army was published 56 years ago, in 1963, and it was his first novel, and it's a pretty powerful showing. In the meantime, in the last 56 years, he's gained a reputation as one of the best living European novelists working today and being translated into various languages today, and has also been named several times as a possible Nobel Prize recipient. As far as the novel itself goes, it's very much a meditation on war, peace, and cultural remembrance of what it means to participate in a war. Ironically, it's only really in times of peace when we have the cultural wherewithal and the ability to take a breath and reflect on what's happened, on what on earth we just participated in. Kadare uses this novel to explore the aftermath of World War II. It's set in roughly the time that he actually writes the novel, which, like I said, he published it in 1963. It's set roughly 20 years after World War II. And like I said, it's a meditation on everything that World War II really brought to bear on Europe, and especially brought to bear on his home country of Albania. There is a nameless Italian general who is really the centerpiece of the novel, and he comes to Albania accompanied only by a priest as sort of his solace, I guess, and an endlessly long list of names and dental records of the men who perished in the war, whose bodies he is meant to excavate and repatriate back to his home country, back to Italy. Progress is achingly slow. The work is grueling. It's rife with existential angst and questions about the morality of war. And I mean, I'm sure you don't need my help as a reviewer of the novel to be able to tell you about some of the really big questions that a very thin, granted, novel, is 250 pages, 264 pages, can bring up when it's about something so topically heavy and dense and thought-provoking. The general, in a really barely concealed frenzy, starts to replay the war in his head. Here's a quote from the novel. Quote, "As soon as I see someone," this is the general talking, "as soon as I see someone, anyone at all, I automatically begin by stripping off all of his hair, and then his cheeks and his eyes, as though they were something unnecessary, something that is merely preventing me from penetrating to his essence, and I envisage his head as nothing but a skull and teeth, the only details that endure. While the priest and the general find themselves interrupting the resting places of the dead soldiers, the general also draws the ire and the hostility of the native Albanians as he interrupts their daily lives. And as you would probably expect, the novel is very much like the Albanian weather that greets them, the general and the priest. It's bleak, it's dreary, it's moody. Well, one of the interesting questions of the novel, especially the title, the questions the title can raise, is what does it mean to be the general of a dead army? It's very much a provocative title until you read it, and then it's almost banal. But that transition from fascinating because you don't know what the novel is about to banal because it's just obviously what the novel is about is a really, really thought-provoking one. What does it mean to be the general of a dead army? It's, I think, one well worth asking, but might have some unsettling answers. A lot of translated literary fiction, so a bit of a note on the translation here. I ended up giving this on Goodreads, and I know the rating system on Goodreads is inherently flawed in many ways, but I ended up giving this 3 stars out of 5, whatever that means to you. To me, it means probably I might slightly recommend it to someone who is interested in it, but it's nothing that I would reread, at least in this translation. A lot of translated literary fiction, if literary fiction is actually a sui generis genre that even exists, can seem stolid and sort of wooden. And to the extent that I failed to enjoy the translation here at all, I think that's why. The characters sometimes seem like they're there for little more than just to be stand-in symbols for ideas that are meant to debate the relative merits of war and its part in, like I said, cultural memory. The 20th century philosopher Isaiah Berlin once said that poetry should only be read in one of the languages that you knew and spoke fluently as a child, because knowing and speaking a language fluently as a child has allowed you to internalize it in ways that you can never really do with languages that you learned as an adult. And as someone who was weaned in English, sometimes I can't help but wonder if the same might be true of fiction as well. Thankfully, most of the fiction I read is translated, and most of the reading experiences that I have tend to be wonderful and even transformative, thankfully. But thankfully, too, for an Albanian writer, there are plenty of other novels that Kadare wrote that have been translated into English. So when I finally decide to read something else by him, I'll have plenty of choices of where to go. And with apologies to F. Scott Fitzgerald, so we beat on, reading against translations, borne back ceaselessly into the pleasures of the text. Let me know if you've ever read Kadare before, and your impressions. If you've read anything else you might like more, or a translation that you would particularly recommend. This is The General of the Dead Army, a novel by Ismail Kadare, the great Albanian writer. I will see you guys next week.